I can barely hear you, Alan.
This is Len. It shows my real name. Gross.
Oh. I wonder if we can change our nickname.
Yeah, I need to work on that. But yeah, I'm presenting anyways. I'm just working on getting us streaming right now.
Right. No, there's no name to no way to change our nickname, unfortunately.
Test.
I can hear you.
Can you guys say some stuff so I can make sure I can hear it on the Twitch?
Saying stuff. We are saying things. Things are being said actively, longly, with much activity and perseverance. Things are being said.
All the things being
Abacadabra.
Thank you so much. You guys are coming through perfect on Twitch right now, so if there's anywhere you guys want to share it so that there's more visibility for people that are going to be not participating but wanting to watch.
Awesome. This is our first class for Chaos Wars, which reminds me I'm going to go do the starting in 5 minutes announcement on all the Discord.
awesome.
I guess also heads up, by the way, just so you guys know, it is streaming on Twitch, so should have asked for consent on that beforehand. You know, people are always welcome to turn off cameras, microphones, or just watch from Twitch if they only want to see and not be seen.
I give my consent to stream on Twitch. Not that my screen will probably be streaming at all, so I give my consent.
While we're waiting, I'll go ahead and talk about all the other exciting classes we have going on this week. After Master Anij's class, we will be doing How the Royal Council Works at 5 o'clock this evening by Squire Antoinette. Right after that, Antoinette will also be doing a class called Event Planning and Organizing 6 o'clock tonight, followed by a beginner quilling class by myself, Journeyman Later, at 7 o'clock tonight. Also tonight, we have a DJ mix, pub and dub night, starting at 7 o'clock. It will be streamed. I know that, and I don't know what other platform we're using for it. So if anyone else knows, they can chime in right now. Okay. And if not, I'm going to continue. Tomorrow, our line of classes is Leather and all its details at 1 o'clock p.m. Gandalf Satchel at 2 o'clock. Belgoth Guild's questions and answers at 3 o'clock. Mead making 1 to 100 at 4 o'clock. Leather watercolor dye technique at 5 o'clock. Beginner mistakes with commercial patterns at 6 o'clock. History of peerage at 7 o'clock. Basic bread without an oven at 8 o'clock. And that is our classes for Friday. On Saturday, we have So You Want to Teach at 10 a.m. Satin Stitch Applique at 11 a.m. Past, Present, and Future of Roleplay in Belgoth at noon. Peerage Council at 1. Flirting and Consent at 2. Guild Meeting at 3. All You Need to Know About Armor at 4. 1v1 Spear vs. Sword and Board at 5. Battle Photos at 6. Beginner Embroidery at 7. And our last class, Saturday evening at 8 o'clock, is Historical Battle Comparisons. So those are all the fancy things we have going on the rest of this weekend. It is now 2 o'clock, so if Master Anij is ready, she will begin our basic tunic making class. I don't see her yet, so I'm assuming she's not ready at this moment. Oh, there her face is.
Okay. There we go. Okay. So, we are doing tunic making today. I have taught this class off and on before. I tried once Chaos probably about 5 years ago before I was actually able to perfect my pattern. And then I've done a few one-on-one classes. So this will be my first group class. Feel free to, if you have your own material and stuff you want to work on it as I am teaching. If you don't, feel free to just hang out, ask questions, stuff like that. And yeah, so we will get started here. The first thing that I do when I'm making a tunic is I go through and take the measurements that I'm going to be using. In this case, I'm going to go ahead and use my lovely dress model thing to take measurements off of, plus a few on myself because it doesn't have arms. But besides that, let's go ahead and see if I can get this over to watching her. There we go. Okay. Let me grab my measurements. All right. So the first measurement that I take for this, and you're going to want something to write down on. So we'll call this measurement A. And the first measurement that we're going to want to take is across the back here. And it's a little bit harder with her because she doesn't have, the rest of her shoulders there. But generally, I go from, if you guys can see this, I go from about mid-shoulder across the back to mid-shoulder on the other side. So that's going to be measurement A. And I will go ahead and step out of the ground for a second and take it on myself. So that I actually have a tunic I can wear things here. Okay, and then for measurement B, this is going to be how long you want the tunic to be. So normally for this one, I go from the top of the shoulder down to however long you want the tunic. Now it's really important when you're taking this measurement that you take it going over the bust or belly. If you take it straight down along the side, your tunic's going to be too short because it won't actually account for whatever it has to go over. So it's important that it goes down the front, over whatever it's going to be covering. And then normally I like to take it to about mid-thigh length. It's up to you. You can do them shorter, you can do them longer. That's about where I find that it looks the best in regards to proportions and such. If you're going for a dress, you can always go longer and do more like ankle length or something like that. So that's going to be your B. And for me, okay. Then the third measurement is how long you want your sleeve. Some people like sleeve going all the way down to the wrist. Some people like just above the elbow. Again, it kind of depends what type of tunic or dress you're making. So for this, we'll just do to a little bit above the elbow for me. So I take it again from that point in the shoulder, and I just go down. I try and keep the arm as straight as possible to get an accurate measurement for that. So we're going to say 9.5 for that. On me anyway. The next measurement, let's see. Okay. The next measurement you're going to want to take is the bicep measurement, and this tells us how wide we're going to make the sleeve. What we don't want to go under, I should say. We can always make it wider, but we don't want it to go under this. So for this, you're going to want to make a fist, get that measurement, and then what you're going to actually do is you're going to write down what that measurement is, but you're going to, when you're putting it onto the fabric, you're going to add 5 inches, and that's going to give you plenty of room for that arm to move. This is in part how we avoid putting a gusset in, because what we're going to end up doing when we draw this out is we're going to make a curve that the point of the curve won't go past this. And so we'll have plenty of room for that arm movement. Okay. So then E is going to be your bust measurement. This is especially important if you're making garb for women or female bodies, because you do not want this to be too tight. So you're going to go right at the point there, the widest point of the bust, and that's, again, going to be one of those measurements that we don't go below. Normally, It's not a problem. It's within the scope of the earlier measurements that we've taken. But again, it's just one of those ones that we just double check on. Okay. Then your measurement F is going to be the waist. Again, an important one to take to make sure that nothing's going to be too tight on the person. So you're going to be going between the bust and the hips. That middle part there, just get whatever measurement that is. And then the last measurement you're going to take is the hips. Again, we're dealing with all sorts of different body types, so these are all just points to double check and make sure that we're not too small as we're coming down. This tunic flares out as it goes down, so it shouldn't be a problem, but you just want to make sure. So you're going to take it right there, the widest point of the hips. If the butt's kind of in there, make sure to include that. Whatever the tunic will have to go over in that part, you want to make sure to include. So.
Track.
Okay, so we've got all our measurements. Now we'll be trying to draw them out here. So for that, let me adjust my camera so that it's looking at the right thing. As much as possible. Okay. Move this out of the way. And some of the, just as a quick thing, some of the tools that I like to use are quilting ruler. It's just nice and straight, provides me nice straight lines. I also picked this one up at some point. This one's about 48 inches long, so that is really nice for doing that slope down. And then for cutting, I normally use a combination of scissors and a rotary cutter. And then whatever your favorite marking tools are. I like to use pencils if I can, special, sewing pencils. If you like to use chalk, you can do that. Pretty much whatever. So we've got linen here. You can, use whatever material you feel most comfy in for a tunic. I personally have found linen tends to be the best, but again, it's kind of up to, your personal preferences, what type of weather, climate, etc. that you're going to be doing. This is folded in half, and it is 29 and a half, so it is it's 58 inches wide total, so it's folded in half right now. I'm going to leave it in half, and what we're going to do is we are going to get it so that it is 4 layers. And it's kind of like when we're making what's it called? Snowflakes as a kid with paper. You fold it so that when you cut it out, you have less pieces to have to work with. And I think this one is actually going to be about right when I unfold it all the way. I think that's the amount of fabric I got. So this is where you will use your measurement. The right page here, sorry. measurement B. So if you want a tunic that's 27 inches long, that's about how long fabric you want. You want your folded fabric to end up as. You definitely don't want it to be shorter than that. So mine's actually a little bit long right now. I forget how short I am. Still 2 inches. Too long. So, and as you can see, as I'm adjusting this, I'm just rolling up the extra fabric back up onto my fabric board so that it's just out of the way as I'm working with this. And I'm using the grids on my rotary cutting mat to help make sure that I'm kind of straight here. The nice thing about these patterns, these tutorials, is that you know how sometimes when you're doing some commercial patterns and stuff, everything has to be exact. If it's not exact, the whole thing is ruined. The nice thing about this is it's not like that. It's very, as long as you give it some extra room, it's very adaptable. It's not going to ruin the entire project if you're off just a little bit. Okay, so I've got 28 inches here to work with. My length about that I was going for was 27, so I'm just going to do it at 28. So I'm going to go ahead and square this off 28 so that I'm not dealing with more fabric than I need to. I don't know if you guys are seeing what I'm doing here. But I'm marking off that 28 inches. I made 2 marks on either end, and I'm going to just even it up on that. Always make sure to be safe when using the rotary cutter, of course. Keep hands out of the way. You can see I'm keeping my hand on the metal ruler as I'm going across. I need to replace the blades on my rotary cutter. There's 2 spots didn't quite cover. That's okay. Okay, well, that's out of the way. Okay, so I'm going to move this down so that's in your guys' view. Let things catch up here. Am I frozen or is it? There we go. Okay. Get rid of the scrap here. Okay. So now I've got my piece. It's the length of the tunic long. It always looks super short and freaks me out a little bit. Yep, that's the measurement. Okay. Okay. So we've got our selvage edge on this side. We've got our folds on this side. We've got the point and a fold on this side. So we've got the point here where all the folds meet, and that is going to be where our neck goes. So now we're just going to start drawing this out. Let's see, where is my... Well, I guess I'll just use it. Should tell me how big. I have an actual, like, neckline template that I made because I was doing this all the time. Okay. So first, actually, we're going to go ahead and start marking out our other measurements. So we're going to take our measurement A, which was the mid-shoulder to mid-shoulder one, and we're going to divide it by 2. So I personally keep my phone handy to do these calculations. You can also, another really cool trick is to see if I can get my camera to show you here. So you take whatever your measurement is, in my case 24, super easy to divide. You go to that point, you fold your tape in half, and you find out what half of it is. Obviously for 24 this is super easy, but let's say you had like 37, right? Fold it in half. Half of 37 is 18 and a half. So to do those, you can do those, on the phone. You can do it in your head. You can do it with a measuring tape, whatever works best for you. So we are going to take half of the shoulder-to-shoulder measurement, because you have to imagine our tunic's folded in quarter, well, kind of quarter/half right now. So we only want half the measurement. So we're going to take 12. And I'm going to mark that out. I don't know if you guys can see that. I'm marking that out there. Okay. Next, we are going to do measurement C, which is the desired sleeve length. And we're going to go from that point that we measured out for the shoulder to shoulder. And I want mine to be about 9.5. So we're going to add 9.5 inches to that measurement. Okay. So we have our shoulder to shoulder. We have our sleeves. There we go. Okay. Okay. Now we're going to take the measurement D. This is our bicep measurement. Remember, we've added 5 to the initial measurement. So, and then we're going to take that. We have basically a loop, right? If we imagine what our bicep is. We're going to take that bicep measurement plus 5 and divide it by 2, so that we are only dealing with half of it when we're drawing it out here. You can, of course, when you're drawing this out, you can, of course, do it on paper. I always do it out on the fabric itself, just because I generally try and make sure that I'm dealing with the latest measurements from someone. So, bodies change as years go by. So, in general, I just find it's easier to just work with where they're at the time, rather than making paper patterns. But it's really up to whatever you feel comfortable with. So we're going to go from that mid-shoulder to mid-shoulder measurement that I marked off. We're going to go now down the fabric. Make sure you're seeing it. Yeah, okay. We're going to go down the fabric the measurement of the bicep measurement plus 5 divided by 2. So we make just a dot there, kind of a star. This is going to be our point that we do not go past. Okay. And then next, what I'm going to mark out is the next part I'm going to mark out is the bottom of my sleeve. Now, if you're doing a long sleeve, this is where you would narrow it or widen it or do whatever you want to make this sleeve fancy and how you're wanting it for whatever you're making. For me, for this one, I'm just going to do a straight sleeve, nothing too fancy. So I'm going to just come down that same measurement as I did for the bicep mark and just make spots there. Just a little bit, hopefully. And then we're going to measure from the dot and make sure that we're dealing with about the same distance out. About there. Okay. So, as I say in the tutorial, now we've like connected up. So, I'm going to draw from here to here. And then I'm going to take, I like to go all the way out to the edge of the fabric. If you want to make a slightly narrower bottom, you can. Just make sure that you have some flare and that it doesn't go smaller than your hip measurement, right? Because you don't want a tunic that's too tight around your hips. So this one, it's a little bit extreme because it's so short. So we're going to bring it in just a little bit. But I'm going to be marking, I'm going to be trying to have it come and be at this dot here. So there, and I'm going to come in, and I'm going to come to about there. I like to have enough room to do my curve in here, so I don't like to draw in too close. If you want to, you can always draw in all the way and then just, brush away the marks and stuff. Now I'm bringing in my sleeve here. Okay. So I want my curve probably about here. So my dot's over here. I don't want to make it any smaller than my dot. I have to remember that there's seam allowances and stuff like that. So I'm going to give myself some room. And make my curve out here. So, now, I don't know how well you guys can see it. Let's see if I can use my measuring tape. So that is basically the outline of my tunic right now. So, I'm going to head and do my neckline now. So, for the neckline, we bring it back over to this corner here. And I am going to do this by hand because I'm not sure where my template went. Actually, maybe I know. Okay, so for the tutorial, you're going to want to go about 2 inches deep and about 4.5 inches wide for the front neckline. So we're going to measure 2.5 inches here. Okay. And then we're going to measure 4 inches. 4.5 inches. So, will this neckline fit everyone? Maybe not, but in general, we found it fits most people. So we've got our 2 points here. I'm going to now connect those.
So we can monetize it as long as I don't have
Okay. Now we have the front of our tunic. Now what about the back neckline? Well, the back neckline, we're going to make this is the back neckline. Okay. This is the back neck. We want to make sure that we cut the smaller part first so that we don't accidentally cut all 4 layers with the deeper neckline. So we've got our basic tunic laid out now. We've got our neckline here. Let me see if I can bring you guys in a little closer here. So we've got, and that is so faint. We've got our neckline here. We've got our arm coming in. There's the armpit going down, staying there. So now we're going to go ahead and cut this out, and then we'll worry about the other half of the neckline. So for this, you can either use scissors if you want. Most of the time, we'll at least do part of it with rotary cutter just because it's faster. Let's try my other rotary cutter. See if it is any better. Again, keeping fingers out of the way. Okay.
Is it not off? I'm sorry. Oh. Oh.
So there's that. And we'll get this part done right here. Okay, so now I have the basic tunic. Now we need to do out the front neckline before we go too much farther. So I just peel back this half so that that's still preserved. And then we're going to draw out this one. So this one's not going to be any farther in, it's just going to be deeper. So what I'm going to do, and again, it helps if you can like line this up on your mat or something like that to help. But now we're going to go 4 inches deep. Mark that out. And then we're going to bring it in a curve around to this point here. So I'm just going to try and hold that steady. And bring that around to there. So now, I'll show you guys here. See. There we go. It's kind of showing up. I've made a little bit deeper one right there. So this I generally just like to cut out the scissors. Okay. There we go. That is now basic tunic. So back to my friend here. Ready? Come on, there we go. Okay. Show you how this then unfolds. You have basics of your tunic. So now what's left is we've got a neckline, you know, any fancy thing we're going to put on the arms, the bottom, stuff like that. So how do we do the fancy parts? Well, I'm going to take a color that goes fairly well with this. So for this one, I've chosen gold. And we're going to start cutting out our fancy bits. So it has little bits of green fuzz on it because it was cleaned with some green on it. Okay. So the first part I like to make sure that I have is what I'm putting around my neckline, because I can find other solutions if I run out of fabric for some reason. I can find other solutions for the end of my arms. I can find other solutions for the hemline. Around the neck's a little bit harder. You can, if you want, you can just roll and hem, but it definitely takes far more practice to get it nice doing it that way. So if I have fabric to do the neckline, I definitely try. Okay, so for this, we want a nice square to start with. And you can also do this out of like the same color fabric too, especially if you want to put it on the inside instead of the outside. But if you're wanting to make it look pretty, then Do I not have in the tutorial how to draw that? No. One moment. I think I might have left some pages on my printer. 1 second. Okay, I am back. Sorry about that brief intermission there. Okay. Okay, so next you're going to want to get a piece of your trim fabric that is about 17 inches long by about 14 and a half. This is going to be oversized. You can get away with less, but this will ensure that you have plenty of fabric to go around the neckline. So that's about what I recommend. Again, we're dealing on a fold here, so we can definitely play with the mathematics of that. I'm going to take 17, cut in half. So we can go 8.5 down. And then we want it to be 14 and a half. Now, what I'm going to go ahead and do here is I want to make sure that I'm dealing with a good straight edge. So I'm going to go ahead and straighten this real quick. Just so that I don't have like a half piece or something. Aha. There's justified. Okay. Now I'm going to line it up on the 2 points that I did. Out. Line it up on the 2 points that I did on this side. That's to that corner. Now, what I'm going to go ahead and do, because I don't like leaving my fabric unsquare, so to speak, is I am going to head and cut this all the way down, even though I'm only doing part of it. I'll definitely like use this other piece of fabric and stuff, but I'm not going to just leave a corner on there. I don't like dealing with fabric that has corners like that. I don't leave my fabric like that. So now kind of fold this up away for now. Okay. There's that. There he is. Let's see how long my sleeves are here. So I'm figuring out how to do the rest of it in regards to trim. I go and measure what I need. I know for the bottom of this, I'm pretty much going to need the whole width of one of those. But for the sleeves, sometimes you can get away with shorter pieces. So this one's 19. Ha. So my piece that's left here from this upper piece that I cut off, this is about 20 inches. So I can cut some sleeve bits off of this. So I'm going to line this up again. The fabric's a little wiggly, so you gotta kind of just play with it. Okay. And I want my trim bits to be about 3 inches wide. 3-inch wide strips give me enough room that I can turn edges under, stuff like that, and I still have a substantial enough strip to work with. You can do narrower, you can do wider. Again, it's all personal preference, but that is how wide I like to do it. So I'm going to mark that. Mark that here. Line up on my 2 dots. Now, that's all the sleeve stuff that I need for this project, so I'm going to just fold this up. Leave that here, because again, we were doubled, so I got 2 from that. So I've got my sleeve, I've got my neck. Let's go ahead and get some bottom pieces here. Bottom trim. Square it up on my mat again here. So down here, this probably should have been ironed. Actually, we're going to work with the other side. It's happier than that side. I do not always iron as much as I probably should. Officially, you should always iron everything. Do I iron everything? No. Most of the time I can get away with not ironing it. I'm also prepared to deal with any issues from not ironing everything. Especially if you're starting out. It's kind of like pinning things. starting out, I tell people everything. By the time that you've made as many tunics as I have, you don't get everything. But you're also prepared that you may have to rip out a whole seam line if you do not. So I just straighten this edge. This edge is a little happier, so I'm going to deal with this one instead of the other one. So here, rather than marking out, I'm going to just use my mattress or my board here, and I'm going to just use the 3 inches and 3 inches since I squared up my fabric to that. And then we're going to do one more time here. 3 inches, 3 inches. So one thought or one thing that sometimes comes up is people are like, oh, well, I want to mark them all out at once and then just go in and do the lines. You can do that. The problem with especially kind of wobbly fabrics like linen is sometimes you'll find out that the lines are no longer accurate after you've cut the first one or two. When me and Oroku were working on making a patched shoe cover, I think it was, we were basically doing 9 patch, and we tried to mark out all of the strips first and then cut them. And we came up with strips that were very uneven, very cattywampus. And so we started measuring, cutting, measuring, cutting. And that just worked so much better. So, okay, so I've got my extra here that will go to making another, being trim on another piece at some point. And I've got, where the camera is, I've got my 2 very long bottom strips. They'll go on either side of the bottom of the tunic. I've got my 2 shorter sleeve strips. And then I've got my square, mostly, it's kind of a rectangle, neck part. Okay, before I keep going, does anybody have any questions here? Everything's good? Cool. Okay. On to the next part. I personally, so you can go one of 2 ways. You can get the trim on at this point, or you can do the neckline. I think in my tutorial, I went ahead and see what I did. I think I did the neckline. That's what I wanted to do. Yeah, I did the neckline. I like to do the neckline first, just because it's kind of the part I don't like the most. And so it gets it out of the way. Put our trim pieces aside here. Gonna clean up our board. Whoop. What dropped? Oh. Okay. So we're going to grab our tunic again. Not take the entire model with you. And to take our tunic again, we're going to lay it out flat. One thing, if you have a marking pencil that doesn't necessarily come out all the way, or whatever you're using to mark, if you're not sure that the spots are going to come out, now is a good time to decide on when the inside and the outside of your tunic is. If it doesn't matter, cool. So, I'm going to line this up. And one nice thing about this is because both this trim piece and the tunic was cut out on folds, I have these 4 very distinct directions. So what I can do is I can kind of use that to line up my trim piece a little bit. It's not exact. If I actually did it this way, I think it would be a little bit more exact. Yeah, there we go. Okay. So here is where feel comes into it. So what I'm going to do, and I can kind of do this more when I flip it over. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to feel over it, and I'm going to feel where that neck hole is. And I'm going to go around, and I'm going to make sure that there's at least a good enough portion. So it seems it's a little narrow right here at the top. So I'm going to actually move this up a little bit. Smooth it out again. I want to make sure that it's absolutely smooth. I just kind of run my hand along that edge to feel where that hole is. So I want to make sure that I have plenty of coverage. I'm not going to be, short on fabric anywhere. There's that. So now, I go along at at least 4 corners, so to speak. I'm going to put the pins. I feel where the edge of that fabric is. I'm going to go just past it into the tunic. I'm going to do that so I have at least 4 points of contact. So the reason why I'm doing this is because this is not the side I want to pin on. Because I can't sew on this side because I can't see where the edge of my fabric is. So I'm going to have to get this flipped over in order to do that. But I want to have this positioned first. So got it positioned. It's covering the neck hole. It has good coverage. So now, basically do the old pulling the tablecloth out without disturbing the dishes. So we do this, and we grab that, and flip it over. That one was not as pretty as I have done in the past, but it gets the point across. Lay everything out again. Make sure that everything is even. So I've got a few little bubble places, but we'll make sure those get even out. So now, this is where I pin everything. Because this part, if you do not pin it, it will not look good. And it is going to look like a porcupine. The biggest thing is putting, in my opinion anyway, I suppose somebody else could do it a different way if they want, but I personally have found that doing it so that the pins go out is the easiest for me. You will encounter that there is a difference of opinion on this between lefties and righties. So sometimes when Heroku is helping me with tunics, and especially like doing the strips and stuff, the perspective between left and right will make it so that the spiky bits go elsewhere. So acclimate it to whatever works for you. I like the spiky bits to go out. I just slowly work my way around the circle. And I'm making sure that I'm grabbing that trim fabric underneath as I'm doing it. Remember, I had the 4 points on there, so that it really didn't move. It couldn't move too much. You know? So I know that I'm still well positioned. I know I still have plenty of fabric on either side. If I want, I can always do another feel test around and make sure where I feel that second layer of fabric coming in. I'm going to go ahead and pin right over where I pinned with the 4 points because I'm going to actually pull those out before I sew. Before I start to sew, I should say. You always want to pull pins out. You don't want to sew over pins. That is bad. Occasionally I do. But you're not supposed to. It's bad for your machine. I've heard that it, in general, messes up the timing on it. So, especially if it hits pin. So, you don't want to run over a pin. Normally I do this while having an audiobook going or music because this can be a very long, tedious process. But we're almost done. I don't know if you guys can see. Maybe a little closer here. When I say pin everything, I mean pin it. It is probably happening.
So our whole unit is in Uruk Hai, and that's nationwide. We're part of Western Uruk Hai, and under that, our group in Utah is the so that's why it's got the symbols on it. And then it's right next to a pirate flag that has a button line.
Another nice thing with linen is it's pretty stretchy and forgiving. So if I were to encounter a bubble anywhere in here, I can normally kind of play with the fabric a little bit and get it to all work out. Okay, so that is pinned. So we're gonna go sew that next here. Get that area set up here. See if I can get it so that you guys can kind of see me sewing. Camera hasn't changed. Camera catch up here. Okay. So I'm gonna take my fabric. Come over here. get it so that you guys can kind of see here what I'm doing. See a little bit anyway. Okay. So normally I try and start kind of towards the back, if you can still recognize where the back is. It's over here. Oh yeah, I want to take out those bottom pins first. I'll just kind of feel them, get those out. Okay, so I try and start kind of in the middle of the back. And I go through, and I make sure that there's no, nothing's bundled up underneath. Everything's lying straight, stuff like that. And then put that down. For this, I'm going to go ahead and keep my needle. You guys can't really see it here. But I have my needle to the closest to the edge of the fabric because I just want a really narrow seam right here. Do that. Put my needle down. And I'm going to start sewing. And again, as you're moving fabric around, stuff like that, make sure to double check underneath. You aren't catching another layer. That is bad, and I have done it. Kind of check real quick, make sure you're sewing, make sure that it's looking good, your stitches aren't looking weird, stuff like that. The other nice thing about having all the pins is it kind of slows you down a little bit, so you're not going to blaze through this and find out that you've sewed 5 layers together. And this is probably my least favorite part because it's so slow. Yay, halfway through. And just as you're going along, you're just slowly turning the fabric as you go around that curve. It's just one big giant curve, basically. So you're just trying to keep the edge of that foot even with the edge of your neckline fabric, your tunic fabric that's on your neckline, so that you just have this super narrow hem. And part of the reason why this hem is so small, and it can be so small, It's because it's not a weight supporting, basically. It won't have anything pulling against it. It's not going to. It is basically just tacking the fabric plate right now. I'll just meet where I started, do a little back and forth. And pull that out. That. Okay. Lay this back out. Now, for this bit, you can use scissors. You can use, I use a tiny little rotary cutter. That's me. And again, if you're going to do that, you have to be very careful that all the fabric is laid out. Nothing is doubled up. You're not going to be cutting through your trim fabric. So, I've got this in the middle of my tunic. I need to clear that. So I'm going to use a tool that Zuyon actually taught me about, which is a little 18mm rotary cutter. It is tiny. That's my finger. Look how tiny it is. So it's very, very cool little rotary cutter. It's especially helpful in doing applique and the like. It's very maneuverable. This is not necessarily one that you use against a ruler. You generally freehand it, but be careful. It is definitely useful when doing things like this. So I'm just going to go around cutting right next to the tunic fabric there. I'm using this like a scalpel or an X-Acto knife. I'm just peeling away that extra fabric in the middle of our neck, our head hole that we don't need. Again, watch your fingers. These are generally very sharp. They need to be. So now I have this. Ta-da! So now what we're going to do is we're going to basically seal this off by reaching through, pulling this all through. Now, depending on your neck, on how extreme the curves are, you're going to want to go around and clip some of the edges. I imagine you could do this with pinking shears. I only recently got pinking shears, so what I just do is I go through and just do some quick clips with scissors. I don't do the V's. I don't, cut anything out necessarily. I'm just in the main corners of this, just kind of give the fabric some more room to move. By clipping it, make sure you're not catching any other layers when you're clipping. Make sure you're not going through that seam that you just did. So you want to make sure your clips are very, very shallow. Okay, that just helps that lay down better. Now we go through and pin again. Like I said, least favorite part. This is the main reason why this can take a while. So with this part, when we're pinning, we want to make sure that we don't get too much fabric in the fold. So like we don't want, the where we pin it, where we sew it to be out here and the hem to be back here. So I kind of put it, I do this motion with my fingers until I get right up to that seam there, and then I pin that. So we want it as close to the seam as possible so that we're not making our neck hole any smaller, and so that it's as smooth a neckline as possible here. This one you don't have to pin quite as close together. I normally do them maybe about an inch apart. You want to make sure that there's not any variation that's happening, between the pins, but it's not necessarily keeping anything from shifting too much. So you can kind of be a little bit more sparse with these. Any questions that have come up so far while I'm pinning this? Around the other side here. That's one thing I've learned is if you can find a way to put your sewing table in the middle of the room, that is much better. It's very easy to be like, oh, we'll put the sewing table or cutting table up against the side of the room and we'll save space and it'll be so much more spacious. No, you don't want that. You want to be able to get to at least two the long sides of your cutting / sewing table. If not 3, 4 would be awesome. I believe Elena has that set up actually. At least two long sides you want to be able to have access to so that you can get on either end of it, get around it, pin it, whatever you need. Obviously, space dictates that you don't have that, and you don't have that. You got to figure out a different way. But it's at all possible. So, I know a big question that comes up a lot is, okay, what about keyhole necklines? So if you were doing a keyhole neckline, basically you would adjust this. So when you're cutting out your trim fabric, you would make sure that it's long enough down that it will accommodate your keyhole. And then you would sew all around, including your keyhole down. You would pull it, cut it, pull it through, and start, pinning it down again, just like I'm doing here. It really can go to whatever shape. You can do V-neck, you can do keyhole, you can do square, you can do oval, you can do circle. This really adapts to anything of that. The biggest thing with keyhole is you start dealing with more extreme curves and corners. So it gets a little more complicated, but it's definitely doable. Just pulling that green fuzz off that was on there. Okay, so we've got that pinned down now, and now we go back to sewing. There. Swing this back. Yeah. Let's see. What can we do? What can we do? Trying to give you guys a better view of the sewing here. That's about as best as we're gonna get. Okay. So pull this back. Okay. Feed it through again. Again, if you can start on where the back is, it's a little bit hard to tell, but this is going to be a little bit more visible, so you want to try and make the front look nice. Okay. What I'm going to do again is I keep my needle to the farthest left that it can go. I've got my edge of my fabric against the edge of my foot. And I'm going to try and do just a really even and steady. This is going to be visible. I'm using contrasting thread rather than matching thread with this. So if it works out, it looks prettier. If it doesn't, then it looks worse. So be aware of that. And I'm just going to do a plain stitch with this. This is somewhere where the more confident that you get, etc., you can start doing some of the decorative stitches, that your machine might have, just to make this look prettier. But I'm just going to do a plain one here. For today, it's faster and more likely to work out. So. Again, just trying to keep a nice steady stitch, trying to keep that foot right next to the edge of my fabric. Just gently maneuvering it around. Again, linen's super pliable, so that makes it both easy and challenging with this. It's super easy to accidentally, maneuver the linen in a place it won't naturally lay when you're done. So you just kind of want to be careful. Try and give it its space, give it its air. You're moving around. Don't pull it too hard. Don't manhandle it too much. You want this to try and lay as naturally as possible when you're done. Make sure that you're not sewing anything more than the 2 layers. Don't want to accidentally have sewn your sleeve bit into your neckline. Yes, I've done it. Around the final corner here. Curve, I should say. And as you come up, especially on these outer, more visible seams, as you come up, you just want to make sure that you're kind of lining up with where you started, just so that you can get a nice, smooth ending. Now, that's out on my table again. As much as possible there. Okay, now for the fun part. Okay, so now we want to figure out the shape of our trim fabric. I'm going to just do a circle, so it's easiest. That's what I've. But here's another place where you can do like a fake keyhole. So if you pre-plan this and you have enough fabric, what you can do is you can have a circle neckline, but then have your trim come down into a keyhole, so that way it looks all fancy, but you didn't actually have to do the hard work of going around a keyhole. So I've done that a few times. But measuring tape. Okay. So now I'm gonna do, I think about 2.5 inches, if I remember right. Yeah. So I'm gonna go around. I'm gonna mark off 2.5 inches all the way around, so that I can cut the fabric to match, turn it under, sew it down. So I'm gonna start here. You want this to be as flat as possible. There's gonna be a few little rumples, but that's okay. So I'm gonna just go around and mark this. Now, some people like having their neckline or neck hole trim fabric all pre-cut out, and they like, cutting it out to a pretty pattern or whatever. You can do that. The reason I don't is because I had a really hard time getting my neck hole on my tunic and my neck hole on my neck hole trim fabric to match up. So rather than go through all the frustration of trying to get that to match up, I developed this method. Is this method better? I don't know. It works for me. So if it works for you, that's great. If you are able to get your neck hole
trim fabric and your neck hole on your tunic to match up every time. That is wonderful. If you have a trick for that, send that to me. Because that definitely makes making fancy necklines easier, less labor intensive. I had another garb maker come to me at one point and say, "How do you do your necklines? How do you do that circle neckline?" I'm like, "Well, this is the process that I do." And he was like, "Well, that's so labor intensive. I can't do that with every tunic." I'm like, "Well, that is fine. That is what I do, though. If you can find a better way, that is cool. But this is the way that I have found to do it." Okay, so I've gone around. The marks are really faint, so you can't really see, unfortunately. But I've gone around and I've marked out 2.5 inches all the way, starting from neck out. 2.5 inches. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to very carefully, with my scissors, cut along the dots, strips, whatever you want to call them. I have marked out. Obviously, you want to try and make this cut fairly clean in your curve. There's a few jagged edges, it's okay. We're going to be turning this under, so at least the edge of it anyway. So, yes. It doesn't have to be perfect. Obviously, the more perfect you can make it, the prettier it'll be. It's okay. And for the record, I did those marks probably about 1 inch apart so that I would have somewhere next to shoot for with my scissors as I'm going around the curve. But there's that. Could you insert ironing in many of these steps? Probably. I, again, try to avoid ironing most of the time. But just making sure nobody's trying to contact me here. Okay, so got this. Now comes the fun part of more pins. Okay, so here what I do is you can measure this if you feel better doing that. Is I fold about 1/2 inch under. And it's really important to just do this gradually working around the circle because otherwise you'll get flat edges. So I just very carefully fold, pin, fold, pin. I try to make sure there's no sharp corners I'm going around. I have in the past used heat and bond and a applique stitch, a satin stitch around the edge of this instead of turning it over. It makes a very stiff neckline, and it doesn't keep as well. The satin stitch, threads start to come out of it, stuff like that, as the tunic gets washed and stuff. So again, it's a pretty labor-intensive process, but it's what I do, and it seems to help the garments last, which is what my shop is all about. I have to remember that when garments like these were being made, we're still discovering parts and pieces of them now. And they lasted. So if you can make pieces that last, then that just saves you in the long run, because then you're not having to replace your garb every year or whatever. So this would probably be even more accurate if I went around and measured as I did it. I don't tend to do that because I end up getting too focused and fussy about it matching exactly. So I tend to eye it. If that does not produce the results that you want, definitely go around and work on measuring it and getting exactly, the amount you want tucked under and such. But I find my peace of mind is happier if I don't measure it. And again, probably just doing pins every inch, inch and a half, just enough to hold the curve down. Here is the tricky part, because getting to where we need any fabric that I've gathered from around is going to try and bubble up here. So this is where I kind of going to play and fidget with it a bit to get it to lie right. Sometimes it takes more or less fidgeting than other times. It depends on how nice the fabric is feeling. It's cooperated today. So there is that pin. And now we go back and sew. I promise you the rest of this will go way faster. This is, again, the slowest part. this is what I tend to get done first, just so it establishes what the good side and bad side are of my tunic, and it gets my least favorite part out of the way. So. Just trying to keep an eye, make sure. Make sure nobody's trying to reach out to me with questions or anything here. Okay. Get a drink of water. Let's sew this here. Apologies for the fan noise in the background, by the way. I'm trying to keep somewhat cool in this room. It is not the best ventilated in the house. But it works the best for sewing. So. Okay. Now for the outside. I'm going to match up again. Now we're going to be using the opposite side of our foot, because we're now flipped. So I'm going to be starting again at the same point. I'm going to move my needle into the center. What I'm actually going to do here is on my, see if I can illustrate for you guys here. On my feet, I have a clear spot between my two prongs, and this is a hard plastic right here. So what I'm going to do is, instead of matching up my fabric with the edge here, I'm going to match it up inside here, because my needle is going to be in the middle. And by matching it up inside here, I'll get as close as I possibly can, reliably, and through this, you know, the same throughout the project, to the edge of my fabric, so that I don't have much. The closer you're able to get to the edge of your fabric, the less flappy you'll get on the edge here, and so the cleaner look you'll get. If you have a decorative stitch that you like here that'll go actually to the edge of the fabric, that's a really good place to use it. Again, I'm just going to do a normal straight stitch for ease. If your machine has it, the like leaf or fern type decorative stitch can be really pretty here. You could also satin stitch this if you wanted. That would help prevent some of the fraying issues that I mentioned with doing the satin stitch on just the raw edge of the fabric. This is turned over, so you shouldn't have any issues with fraying coming out. You could definitely do a satin stitch here if you wanted. And as you go around, Occasionally you'll encounter where it's trying to bubble or do a sharp corner or something like that in your curve. You just want to kind of play with those with your, as you're coming up to them, try and even them out. Make a nice smooth curve as you're going around. Biggest thing is just, pay attention to your fabric. Pay attention to what you're sewing. Most of the mistakes I've made or I've observed tend to be when you're not actually fully in tune with what you're doing. So the more you can minimize that, in general, the less issues you have. You want to try not to play with the ring too much. You're going around because your perspective on the sewing machine is not necessarily accurate as opposed to, when you have it all laid out and you were pinning it initially. So, definitely work on smoothing out any edges that try popping out and stuff like that as you go around, but don't be tempted to like undo 3 or 4 pins and try and redo it, because it won't look right because your fabric's all different than how it was. And again, yes, I've tried it. anytime I'm like, don't do this, it's generally because I did it. So okay. So our neckline, get this all smooth out, is done. So I'm just gonna come along, use scissors, snip off these threads here before they cause any trouble. These, by the way, are embroidery scissors. They have a nice little bend in them so that it makes it super easy to get up close to the fabric. You can pick them up if you want. You can use regular scissors. I just like having them around. Okay, so these are, that is that. As you can see, I don't know if you can see it over here. I see it because you're on me. There's 2 little spots where it's not quite a nice smooth curve, but as you do more practice and stuff like that, you'll be able to minimize that. I have not made this in about a year, I think. So, I'm a little rusty. But now we get to start putting on our other trim pieces, which is going to go so much faster. So, grab our 2 short trim pieces. There we go. Okay. These are actually a little bit longer than we need, which is totally fine. We will just kind of center them up. And we need to make sure we're doing this on the right side here. It's going to be coming around, so I actually want to flip this upside down when we're doing this. Otherwise, when we flip over the trim pieces, they will be on the wrong side. Like I said, the neckline helps by doing it first because it kind of establishes what your good side and bad side are, especially when you're dealing with neutral fabric. So, but line this up. This is one of those places where, as you get more experienced, you may or may not need to pin this. I am still going to pin this again because I have not made this in a while, and B, to show you what pinning it looks like, and C, to make sure I don't mess up. So, and I actually, so I have, can't really see it. I have a selvage edge on this side. I don't really want that to show up, so I'm going to actually not quite center this up. I'm going to move it a little bit more that way so it doesn't show up when I flip it around and get it in its final place. So at the very least, you want to mark, you want to pin where you start. You want to throw a few pins in the middle here somewhere so that it doesn't shift around too much on you. Another nice thing about linen is it kind of sticks to itself. So, you know, it's not slippery. It'll kind of stick to itself. It's friends. So. One thing here is, depending on the shape of your sleeve, you want to make sure that your trim is long enough that when it gets folded over on the other side, it'll still go past these edges here, because you want it to be enveloped into the hem that you're going to be sewing this together here. So you don't want it sticking out. You don't want any raw edges. With linen, it is super important that you do not have any raw edges, because any raw edges that are left raw, even if there's a seam in them, it doesn't matter. If they're left raw and have access to the outside world, they will shred. You can use a serger if you want. I personally have not found that a serger secures it enough to leave it raw. So I do a modified French seam that I'll show you here in a little bit. It's basically kind of what we're doing with the trim, honestly. But I don't personally like just serging on the edges of linen. I don't feel it secures it enough, especially for fighting garb. But again, that is my perspective. So, you know, your mileage may vary. Definitely apply the scientific method and follow it. But that is what I have found with my experiments. So, okay. So I'm gonna go ahead and pin both my sleeves to help save time going back and forth. I have actually in the past gone and pinned everything, pinned the sleeves, pinned the bottoms, and then I just kind of go wee with the sewing machine. But I will do it a little bit slower here. And yeah, you know, if you're going for, somebody commented that, you know, they go for more of a monster look, so they really like leaving their raw edges, and that is a great way to achieve a more rough monster look. you know. So it depends on what you're going for. There's definitely different ways you can age fabric, etc., make it look worn, make it look ragged. You know, if your character is less affluent or more living on the wilds, then you can definitely make adjustments to your sewing techniques to help achieve those looks. So. And I know some seamstresses and tailors that, for example, love using a serger, and it seems to work for them. For my stuff, it hasn't. So, okay, so those are pinned. I'm gonna go ahead and sew those. I'm going to step away here for one moment, check on my dog real quick. So if anybody has any questions, feel free to type them up. I'm gonna mute myself here real quick. Be right back.
So I just wanted to take a moment to laugh at myself for messing up the neck.
It's okay. We've all been there so much, so often.
I was frustrated and then I laughed because it was just but I caught up and we're good. She just did her sleeves, right?
Yes.
She didn't do the bottom edge. Okay. Just checking. So does anybody have any questions? Anybody that's watching that's a student that has been following both of us?
I don't know, they're all muted and most of them have their videos off.
Oh, okay.
I see we do have a comment in the chat about raw edges that Frey can go and make for some nice monster looks. So my word of caution would be to just make sure you finish any raw edges on the seams, because if it frays on the seams, then you just have a broken tunic. But fray on hemlines, so your edges and your end of your tunic can make for awesome monster looks for sure.
Yeah, I agree. And linen loves to fray. Cotton, you kind of have to tease it to fray, but linen loves to fray. The linens that we have nowadays are not as tightly woven as most of our cottons. And if we had access to the old looms way back when, our linen would be much more tighter weave like most of our quilting cottons. But they just do it different now and it just doesn't make sense.
For sure.
Can you put in a stitch to stop it from going too far? Absolutely.
Yes.
As long as your thread matches your material, then you can totally run a stitch at whatever depth you want your fray to go, and it should stop.
Especially if you do a zigzag stitch instead of just a basic straight stitch. That'll help prevent it from going fast.
No, monsters never really match.
No.
It's kind of like pinking shears.
All right, looks like Anisha's back. I'm going back to mute.
Yep.
monsters ever match? Nope. No, I've seen a few. I've seen a few kits where monsters do matching stuff. Kind of. It's more a color theme. I've seen some really cool ones. So. Okay, so now we're going to sew this on. So this one, again, edge of the fabric, needle in the middle. Fix it, much faster. Okay, other side. Sure that you and your the edge of your tunic fabric are staying even. So okay, so now I can maybe I'll do it all the things. Okay. Oh, the camera again. Okay. So now what we're going to be doing. Okay, so we've got it sewn to the wrong side. So now, similar to what we did with the neckline, we're going to bring it over and then we're going to pin it down. Now, this is a spot where ironing can definitely help. Again, I tend to just kind of massage it between my fingers and get it flat. But if ironing is your thing, this is definitely a good place to do it. I probably actually will pull out the iron here for the next part of this after I sew this bit here. It just makes it so much easier. The caution I would say with ironing at this particular stage is, again, you don't want that seam wandering in farther than it needs to be. So you really want, if you have the time and patience for it, you really want to use your fingers for this part to get that seam right out on the edge of your fold. Because the iron can just, it goes so quick with the iron that sometimes you don't notice that you have an extra fold in there, basically. And so just want to be super careful. I'm going to pin this part down a little bit more, going back to that about an inch, mostly because you know, we're dealing with fabric that's getting bent over at this point, getting folded. So we want to make sure that the pins help reinforce that. That's one side. Other side. Same thing. Just check and make sure I'm not missing any questions here. Okay. So, and again, you know, as you get more practice with these, depending on how many you're making and stuff, you know, you kind of start to production line it. You know, you get all of them on a tunic. You get all of them in for the first line of stitching, and then you go through and you get all of them folded over and pinned for the second line of stitching, and then you know the third. And it kind of streamlines it because you know you're not going back and forth from your cutting table to your sewing quite as much. You can just kind of sew one strip, then the next strip, then the next strip. So just kind of makes it a bit easier. Like I said, audiobooks or radio series or music, something helps. Okay, cool. Straighten out my back. Okay, so those two lines are done. So I'm gonna go ahead and sew those on here. And I'll probably break out the iron for the next step somehow. This one I am just lining up the edge of the fabric with the edge of my foot. If you want to do a slightly narrower one, you can. Again, this is another really good place for a decorative stitch if you have one that's reliable that you really like. The next part farther out will be another really good place for one. So another thing you could do here is do color matching here and color contrasting here to just kind of play with little details, as we like to say, and it just kind of helps make things look a little fancier. You can also, I guess it would be after the next step, but before going on, you could place trim somewhere in here. And that was really pretty too. Not trim, but like, this is trim fabric, but like commercial narrow trim that has like pretty patterns or stuff. So ankle woven trim in here if you have it. And just trying to keep a nice even line. It may wander a little bit, that's okay. You're just trying to keep it as even as possible. Mostly where it really matters is right at the ends, because those are going to be matching up at the bottom of your sleeve. So you want to try and make sure those match and everything comes together. That's where it really matters. Making sure, of course, to do our forward and backward, beginning and end of every line of stitching. The more practice that you get, the more seamless you'll be able to be with your stitching. The less you have to slow down and stop as you go. So pulling pins and stuff. Okay. Let's see about pulling out the iron here. Set your iron to whatever you're working with. Mine has a linen setting, so that's nice. I'm not sure if I'm gonna be able to do this so you guys can see, so I apologize for that. But the main thing that I'm gonna do is I'm going to flip this out for a second, iron down the edge, and then iron it down onto the thing. This is another area where heat and bond and such can be nice. I don't really like using it here because, again, it makes it kind of bulky and stiff. So I don't tend to like to use here. I did it for a little bit and I was like, oh, this is awesome. This makes it so easy. And then I didn't like how it was affecting So I don't know if you can see, but I ironed down that edge. And now I'm just bringing it down. I'm going to iron it down onto the sleeve so that it's nice and smooth. And here is where I will bring out the measuring tape because I want to make sure that those trim pieces come to the same measurement on each end so that 2 inches there. So that when they meet, they don't look funny. 2 inches there. Cool. So that, I don't know how well you can see it. That's done down now. I'm going to go ahead and pin it. Hey, this is Kayla's Sewing Shop. We have puns here. That's what we do. Okay. I'm going to pin this down. Again, you can see, I don't know if you can see from where the camera is, but it's a little bit wavy. It's okay. It doesn't matter. You know, when they're wearing it, they'll just kind of flow to their body. The general width of the trim piece is 2 inches after all these folds and stuff. And it just kind of moves and flows with the linen underneath. That is good. That's what we want. I could go along and be like, it's a millimeter off. But I would probably be bald by the time I was done from tearing my hair out, trying to make everything match exactly. So this thing is to make sure the edges match so that as close as possible, so that you're not getting to where at the bottom of the sleeve you don't want, the yellow to not match up and stuff. So that is the important bit. I am not used to talking this much. I drink some more water. Okay. Again, just bringing out that trim piece, using the iron very carefully. Make sure to keep your fingers out of the way. Just fold over about 1/2 inch. Just going along. Make sure that's securely ironed down. Pull up the sleeve a little more. So the weight, part of what I'm wrestling with here is the weight of the fabric is pulling down the sleeve a bit, or pulling down the rest of the tunic as I'm trying to iron it. So that's a challenge. That. That down. Make sure not to accidentally grab your your ironing board cover with it. Go ahead and measure that. It's there. I have it over here. And it's there. That should be about right. So this trim piece is just like a line or two, a millimeter or two past what the other one is. The other one's exactly 2 inches, and this one's just like a mark or two past it. But because the two sleeves will rarely ever be put right next to each other, it's okay. As long as this end matches this end, it's fine. Obviously, if you want them to match exactly, you are free to spend the time to do that. But I, as neither a mentor nor a judge, am going to come along and be like, they were just too mixed up. No. Okay. So, nice thing about my iron, we got this because the rep insisted, it turns off on its own. So, I do not have to worry about it staying on forever or anything like that. It'll turn off on its own if I don't touch it for a little while. So now we're again on the opposite side of our trim fabric. I move my needle back over edge. Now I am going to try and get as close to that edge as I can so that I don't have an unsewn flappy bit. Even though it's tucked under, the closer you can get, the less chance of it having issues. Oh. So you can see. Now I'm going to do the other side. All right. And as I mentioned earlier, it would be right after this step that then if you wanted to put in a commercial trim to make it a little fancier, you could do that. So you'd secure this down, and then you get that trim positioned here right on that edge between the trim fabric and the tunic fabric. Put it right there at that edge. Another place that I sometimes put commercial trim is if my fabric isn't wide enough to do my sleeve, either because I'm doing a longer sleeve or something like that. I've put it right over that seam there, and it makes it look so much better than just leaving the seam. So what you'll notice is basically we are doing every ornamentation, every special thing for this tunic before we sew up the sides. I've just found A, it was part of the original tutorial that I learned off of, and B, it makes it so much easier than trying to deal with curves and restricted, once you've got the edges sewn up. Working with it flat is just so much easier. Okay. So we've got these. So, one thing I like to do now is just kind of quick cleanup thing. Is I like to match up. Yeah, it just looks like my video's frozen. So give me a second here. You can do this after doing the bottom too. That's actually not how I want to do it, but I like to match these up here. Go ahead and just I like to get rid of these little bits because that'll interfere when we're doing final scene. So I just like to snip those now so that I don't have to worry about it. Again, be careful if you're using a rotary cutter. And that just leaves that nice and clean right there. So I just kind of like to go periodically, make sure edges are looking good and stuff. The earlier you catch an issue in this process, if there is an issue, the easier it tends to be to fix. So it's good to periodically look over your tunic, see how it's going, see if there's any concerns. Okay, now let's get the bottom going here. So, you may notice, here if I pull this out some more, these are pretty extreme angles here. This is more a cosmetic thing in regards to how my tunics are done. You can definitely like round your tunic, stuff like that, so they appear to have a flat edge. Mine come down to points. It started as more of a lazy thing, to be perfectly honest, because I didn't want to have to try and figure out how to bring them up to, make them seem like they had a flat bottom. And then I started making them, and they made a really cool effect like that. They kind of end up making points going down. So that's how I like to make mine. There are many different ways you can adjust the bottoms of these to adjust how they'll look in the end. That's just how I do mine. So if you prefer a flatter look, if you prefer, it to be longer in the back and shorter in the front, or vice versa, you can. This tutorial, this pattern is so adaptable, which is why I love it so much, because it gives you a base that'll fit your body or the body of the person you're making it for, and then you can just play with adjusting it from there. I'll just put you a little bit further back here. Keep running into my model here. Okay. How do we pin this? As you can see, I kind of centered this, so there was a fold in the middle anyway from when the yellow linen was, or the gold linen was folded, so I matched that up in general with the fold on the purple, and that made it super easy to make sure that I have plenty on both sides. It goes over a bit. There we go. I don't know if you can see the gold actually extends past the purple. Again, just like the sleeves, this is totally fine and actually preferred, because then when it all gets folded over, I'll make sure that there's no point where the gold runs out before the purple does. So now we just get to pinning. Again, you know, if you're really experienced with this, you can maybe skip pinning it. I like to at least pin the beginning and the end. Make sure I'm kind of on the right track still. Pin every 2 or 3 inches, especially with long bits like this. While I'm pinning this, does anyone have any questions so far? Again, keeping track of what's your inside, what's your outside, so you make sure that when this gets flipped over, you're dealing with the right side. Okay, so that's pinned. Now let's sew this. Sit back in the trailer. Okay. I'm not missing anything. Same thing as with the arm ones here. Just doing that first securing seam on there. I have it the edge of the fabric right against the right side of my foot, and my needle in the middle, and just sewing that as quickly as I can. Making sure I'm keeping both edges of the fabric even. Make sure I'm still sewing, haven't run out of bobbin thread, you know the drill. that's both ends of that. Rather than laying it out and pinning it, I'm going to go ahead and do a running press of folding it over. I would not necessarily recommend doing that if you have not before, or if you don't have experience with this. I'm going to do it here to try and make sure that we get done in time. But basically, I do the same fingers. I get a good starting point here. Bring that in to just inside the right hand arm of that foot, or toe, I guess you call it. And the needle in the middle. And I'm just going to press so with my fingers, using the tension from the needle holding the fabric down, it going over the edge of the sewing machine there. Between the two of those, I can normally get a pretty good section kind of pressed down between my fingers for this process. Of those little time-saving things you learn, especially when dealing with long strips of fabric. Will generally not be quite as accurate as going through and you definitely keep a good eye on it. It does work. Okay, so it's important to double check that your bobbin hasn't run out or anything as you go through long strips, because otherwise you will get to the end and you only sewed half of it. There will be great despair. Especially if you've gone through and pinned it all. There's one side. Yeah. It's also a good thing to double check between, batches of long seams is, if your machine is lucky enough to have a little window in it, check how much bobbin you got left. Keep an eye on that. It will save you heartache. Another way you can save time on a tunic like this is by not putting trim on, in which case all you'd have to do is turn these edges, and whether it actually saves time or not, because you got to turn them at least twice. If you have one of those fancy tools on yet, and it'll cooperate with the linen, you might be able to do a nice rolled hem. Can save you a little bit of time, especially if you're not dealing with it. If you're just dealing with the cotton, you can just roll it once. I don't normally keep. Okay, so those two are to the point now where we want to iron and turn them. Just wake up my iron again. Get it back up to heat. Good. I'm glad it is soothing. this over here.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I'm just getting on here to start testing the stream for this one. For this stream.
Okay. So yeah, it's looking like we're probably gonna run over 5 o'clock a little bit. Is that gonna be okay?
You are welcome to run over 5 if you want, Master Anij. Antoinette's class is starting in 8 minutes, so I'm going to leave at 5 o'clock so I can go monitor that. And I'll end the recording at 5 as well.
Okay. So, still watching. It doesn't look like we'll be able to quite finish this in time for 5 o'clock.
There is
I'm not able
also,
to.
you can switch and go to the Discord after class. After class chat. That is.
Okay. I can do video on that, right?
Yes.
Saturday's the only day I'm worried about because
cool.
I ride my horse Saturday.
I might go ahead and do that then, just so that people can see how I do the modified French theme that I do. So.
Okay, in that case, I'm gonna go ahead and end the recording and jump over to Antoinette's. Thank you, Anij.
Okay. You're welcome. Everybody that's still watching, I'm gonna go over to the Discord video, okay?
Thanks.